one of the big two conferences along with the SEC this year. You had two playoff teams last year. And let's get into it. One of the two playoff teams, the Michigan Wolverines, we'll start there. Two-time defending Big Ten champions, 2 straight wins over Ohio State for Jim Harbaugh and company. 13-1 last year, 9-0 in the regular season in the Big Ten. The only loss coming in their semifinals appearance, the Fiesta Bowl, to TCU. Lucas, it's, outside of Georgia, probably been the best program over the last handful of years. I mean, I know before these last two it was a little rocky with Jim Harbaugh, but they've really found something here, right? It's a team that's won the Joe Moore Award the last 2 years for best offensive line in the country. J.J. McCarthy's back at quarterback after throwing for almost 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns last year. Cade McNamara off at Iowa. We'll talk about him a little later. You bring back Blake Corum. You bring back Donovan Edwards. This is a team that on paper I think should be one of the best teams in the entire country this upcoming season.
No, I completely agree. I mean, 15 starters back from that team last year. And you mentioned, prior to 2021, things were not looking great for Michigan. And I think you have to give a lot of credit to their administration, to their program, for being patient with Harbaugh. I remember, we had just started that podcast during what was just a weird COVID year when they had gone, I think it was 2-4. And we were on this podcast saying, it might be done. This might be one of those where maybe they don't fire Harbaugh, but maybe he gets a job in the NFL, and it's just kind of a peaceful move. And he got the new contract, and all he's done is really, really reward them. And I think Harbaugh has got this program. This is where Michigan fans thought that this program would be underneath him, and he's finally gotten them here. And now it's showing results. They have, even right now, they have a top 5 recruiting class as of right now, considering the in the 24/7 rankings. But you mentioned kind of the guys they bring back on offense. There's a chance that they might be a Joe Moore Award winner again this year, and that was with losing two draft picks. They brought in a couple transfers. Drake Nugent, who started over 24 games at center at Stanford. Ladarius Henderson, who you're familiar with, who's a very good left tackle at Arizona State. But then you look on the other side of the ball, too. Defensively, this was a top 10 scoring unit once again with a new defensive coordinator in Jesse Minter. And this was after they lost David Ojabo, Aiden Hutchinson. And all they did was produce 2 more NFL draft picks, including one other first-round draft pick in Mozzie Smith. So I think you're going to see, they do have to replace those guys again, but I think they've shown that the talent development that they have at that position is very, very good. Linebacker, they return all 3 guys. It should be one of the best units, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country, specifically with Junior Colson, who had over 100 tackles last year. They may have a little bit of issues. They lost a couple guys in the secondary, but one guy to look at in the secondary, Will Johnson, who last year took over at corner, started I think the last 5 or 6 games, including the playoff game. Was a true freshman, was one of the highly coveted recruits. He'll be back there year in. I think the biggest thing, and we were talking about this before the pod with Michigan, is once again they get a very, very beneficial schedule. Right. Where you look at it, I mean, pretty much they don't have to play Penn State or Ohio State until November. And they don't have a Power 5 team in the non-con. So I think it's very, very beneficial for them to have another very strong season under Harbaugh.
Yeah, last 3 games for Michigan, November 11th at Penn State, November 18th home at Maryland, and November 25th home Ohio State. Those are going to be, those are the other 3 teams in this division that you are competing with. Maryland, I think, a different tier than the other 2 teams that we'll get to here next. Only question mark for Michigan, I would probably say, would be the pass catchers on the outside. Mm-hmm. You lose Ronnie Bell, you lose your top tight end, Luke Schoonmaker, who was a second-round draft pick. You have Cornelius Johnson back, who caught 32 passes. You have Roman Wilson back. You wonder if they're going to have some explosiveness outside, but the running game should be excellent. Blake Corum, almost 1,500 yards last year. He got injured against Illinois, missed the last game of the season against Ohio State. Donovan Edwards, almost 1,000 yards for him on only 140 carries, is back. Lucas mentioned the schedule. They had a non-conference game against UCLA get canceled. Not exactly sure why. So the non-conference is East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green. In conference, one thing to note here quickly, Big Ten East teams will play 2 games on the road against the Big Ten West, and they will play 1 game at home against the Big Ten West, and then vice versa. Big Ten West teams get 2 Big Ten East games at home, 1 Big Ten East game on the road. From the Big Ten West, Michigan draws Purdue at home, Nebraska and Minnesota on the road, and then the other home games in conference, Rutgers, Indiana, Ohio State. On the road, they'll play Michigan State, Penn State, and Maryland. The over-under win total for Michigan is 10.5. The over on FanDuel is -148. The under is +120. Lucas, you were pretty glowing in your review of Michigan. I think I have a feeling where you're going, but why don't you tell us here?
It's over, and it's largely just because of that schedule. I mean, I think the floor at minimum is 10-2. Yes, that would be under the 10.5, but I think that's the floor in general. I think they're going to do better than that. So I'm going over. This should be one of, I think, the top 2 teams in the Big Ten East. I'll disclose the other top team later, but yeah, over for me. I think is fairly easy, like it was last year, because of the same schedule.
Last 2 seasons for Michigan, 25 and 2 Big Ten titles, 2 Big Ten East titles, 2 wins over Ohio State. Over for me. Even if you split Penn State, Ohio State, you're 11-1. You're not going to lose a game in the non-conference. We should note Jim Harbaugh is I don't know if it's official, but likely will be suspended the first 4 games of the season due to recruiting infractions. Those games will be all home against East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. So the road schedule I would say is a little tricky. Penn State, Maryland, Michigan State on the road. But I think the floor is 10-2, but I think 11-1 more likely than 10-2. I am joining you on the over. All right, let's get to the other opponent, the main rival for Michigan. It's the Ohio State Buckeyes, 11-2